All right. Our guest speaker today is Martha Sweezy, Ph.D. Martha is currently an assistant professor at Harvard Medical School and a clinical and program development consultant at Cambridge Health Alliance. She has written and co-authored several books on internal family system therapy, including IFS Therapy for Addictions with C.SICE. Martha's latest book is titled Internal Family Systems Therapy for Shame and Guilt. Her book offers a fresh perspective on the roles of shame and guilt in psychological distress and presents a step-by-step framework for treatment and recovery, which is the subject of our workshop today. Martha will speak for 30 to 40 minutes, followed by Q&A, and our workshop will last for 90 minutes today. Thank you for taking the time to share in your very, very helpful work with our community. Please, everyone, welcome Martha. And
let's see. Thank you. There. Now you can hear me? Okay. Great. All right. So now I'm gonna try and share my screen here, which I did successfully a minute ago. There it is. Share. Okay. I think that's good. Can everyone see that?
Yeah.
That's good. Okay. So the two books you just mentioned sort of are I'm putting them together, some of the information in both of them to present what I'm going to present to you today, and which is an IFS informed approach to addiction and shame. Let me see if I can figure out how to go forward. There we go. So just many of you may be familiar with IFS, but I'll just kind of go over it briefly. The plural mind it's an assumption that we have a plural mind and that this is normal. That's the basis for IFS, and that the plural mind includes at least, and what's relevant for IFS is two forms of consciousness, which is what we call parts and the self. The self, and IFS describes this with the acronym, the 8 C's, is characterized by curiosity, calm, clarity, connectedness, confidence, courage, creativity, and compassion. So the self is able to sort of zoom out to get the bigger perspective, the bird's eye view, and zero in with a lot of curiosity, concern, and compassion, and those other 8 C's, as well as a bunch of other very centered qualities like kindness. So when we talk about the self, we're talking about something that all of us have access to. And all of us also have parts. And parts have 2 roles, especially if you're sort of having a situation where there's some distress, you'll find the parts in these 2 roles. One is that vulnerable parts who get hurt and get banished from consciousness in all kinds of ways. And they're called exiles in IFS because of their banishment. And then there are protective parts, and they are either proactive or reactive. And the proactive and reactive protectors tend to polarize with each other. Proactive parts inhibit, they manage, prevent, try to control. And in response, reactive parts disinhibit. And they distract, soothe, change the subject. Now, I'm sort of describing, and what we're going to focus on is the more extreme ends of behavior for these two roles. And if you are just going along in your life without any big problems, you're still going to have manager parts who get you out of bed in the morning and get you breakfast and get you in the shower and get you to work or school or whatever you're going to do that day. And they're the very practical kind of keep going, be socially acceptable, belong to the group, be loved, be productive parts. And we need them. There's nothing wrong with them. And the reactive parts, the more disinhibited parts, are the parts who might say, and now it's time for a vacation. You got to go for a bike ride. You got to take a break, get out of the office, go for a walk. You know, don't do that homework tonight. Forget about it. Whatever. And there's nothing wrong with all that. It's a balanced system, which we need, where some of these parts who are taking care of business keep us on track, and some let us get a break and get some relief. The problem is that this balancing act in the face of distress can cause these parts to become extreme. And this is what Cease and I wrote about in the IFS manual on addictions that we wrote, the addiction polarity, in which manager parts, the proactive ones, start doing a lot of shaming. The exiled parts, the ones who are exiled in any case, are exiled because they feel shameful. They've been injured in some way, and that injury or insult said to them, there's something wrong with you, you're worthless, you're unlovable, you're not good enough, you're too much, whatever. And so those parts are going around burdened with what we call with what we call burdens. And those burdens, the essence of them is usually a sense of shamefulness. And then there are the shameless reactive parts who get going in response to the shaming parts, who are trying to either improve the parts who've been injured or keep them out of sight. So the proactive parts are saying, you know, we need less of you, whoever it is you're going to draw these, you're going to cause problems, you're going to draw these insults, get out of the way, get out of sight, or get better, improve yourself. Don't be this, don't be that. And in response to all that inhibitory energy, shameless reactive parts gear up. And that's the addiction polarity. So note that the proactive inhibition, the shaming, motivates the reactive disinhibition, the distracting and soothing. Yet when most people look at what's my problem in life, or other people look at us and say, what's your problem? If they see any disinhibition, they'll say, that's the problem. You're too much, you're doing too much of this or too much of that. And that's what you need to control, right? So, but actually we're kind of looking at it from a different angle. We're saying that it's the inhibition internally that is motivating this needed kind of outlet and relief of the disinhibition. So in response to the excessive inhibitions, the shaming and the warnings of proactive protectors, you get these reactive protectors who overuse substances, get involved with risky sex, porn, gambling, overeating, etc. Right? So why is it so important for these reactive parts to step up? Because the inhibition, when it becomes excessive, is actually life-threatening. People, if they feel too bad about themselves, they're at risk of dying, of killing themselves, either slowly or quickly. So A caveat is that protective parts, which I think I just said also, are standard, they're normal, they mean well, they'll always be with you. So I'm not saying that protective parts are a bad thing. But in the extreme, proactive protectors become too severe, and reactive protectors become kind of heroic and reckless. And they get in this cycle with each other, where one provokes the other. And in general, addictive processes are caused by what I call the shame cycle. And this is what I wrote about in the Shame and Guilt book. It's a kind of infinity cycle, figure eight, in six acts. So the first act is an external, usually an external interaction. That's some kind of shaming injury, and a bad thing happens. And nobody gets through childhood without bad things happening, without adults or siblings or peers shaming us. That's inevitable. And the question is how it lands, right? Am I vulnerable to that shaming? So kids can't control the ways in which they're vulnerable. And when they are, there's a kind of involuntary acceptance of an insult that's primed by their vulnerability, by their smallness, their lack of power, their belief, their sort of innocence and belief in what people are telling them. And when that happens, they have parts who conclude, a bad thing happened means I'm bad, or I'm too much, or I'm too little, or that I'm worthless, I'm unlovable, right? And this is followed by 4 more acts that can really come in any order. So I'm just going to give them to you in this order. There's internal shaming of the injured part by a proactive protector who goes, that's right, you are bad, you are a problem, you get all of us in trouble, you need to improve, you need to shut up, you need to stay out of sight. Right? And a kind of scout team that starts up with these internal warnings to ward off future shaming. Do be this, don't do that, watch out. These parts are full of instructions about how to avoid shaming. And then there are parts who externalize, and they engage in external shaming and raging to externalize or project that sense of shamefulness that is such a hot potato internally. So they're going, hey, it's you, not me. And if you've ever watched any of those couple therapy sessions on TV that they're showing nowadays, that's the kind of thing you'll see right off the bat. It's not me, I'm not the problem, you're the problem. And then there's the team that steps up with distraction and self-soothing, have a drink, eat some chocolate, look at some porn, place a bet, watch TV, right? It doesn't have to look like a big addiction process. It can just be watching TV too late into the night, which a lot of people are watching too much TV, distracting with a phone, which we see people, I certainly do it. I see people around me doing it all the time. So distraction and self-soothing can come in all different guises. And that team can be very active. So once we get into this cycle of feeling shameful, being shamed some more internally, getting reactive and trying to get some relief from that shaming with shameless behaviors that draw more shaming inside and out. How do we get out of this? Where's the exit? So, I'll talk about my preferred IFS informed approach to addictive processes. The first thing I do is call a summit meeting. Rather than asking some parts to back up, I want to get everybody to step in. So I'll say, hey, somebody talks about having a part who's shaming and a part who's drinking and a part who feels awful. I'll say, let's get everybody together here. Let's get all of them to come and sit with you being the client's self, at a summit meeting. And just inviting that sometimes gets parts who are very close to the person and take over their consciousness, so that the person's seeing the world through that part's eyes. That just calling a summit meeting will help those parts to separate a little bit, so that when I say, I want you to be at the table with all these parts, and I want them to notice you, ask them if they see you. That's the beginning of what we call unblending in IFS, where parts begin to realize that, hey, we're not alone. There is somebody here who's actually kind of a grown-up, who has all these resources and who's interested in us and our problems, and who's not going to be unkind or blaming or shaming with us about the fact that we got into this problem, but who's going to be curious and interested in helping out. Right? So that's when I call a summit meeting. I want the client to be there with this other kind of approach of consciousness, which we call the self, and the parts to show up in whatever way they do. Sometimes people are very visual, sometimes they're not, and they just have a felt sense that the parts are showing up. Sometimes they hear more than see, but in whatever way as you experience your parts, you'll find out if you turn your attention inside and get curious about them, because they're there. So you particularly want to be sure that both sides of the addiction polarity show up at the table. All right. You don't want one side dominating the conversation. If you have an argument between, if you have an outside polarity between two people, you as the negotiator want to be sure that both parties are at the table to present their perspective on it. Otherwise, there isn't going to be any progress. And that's true inside as well, with these parts who have gotten into a big conflict internally over how to handle danger, the danger of being unacceptable and unlovable. What do we do about this? Do we improve or do we just, say, I got to have a break here. I gotta get away from this feeling as fast as I possibly can. That's the reactive, feel better side. The other side is busy trying to make improvements, right? And they get very frustrated with each other and cannot often feel they're working at cross purposes. But in fact, they share the same goal, right? Which is to be safe, be loved, and be included, right? So the proactive critical managers we want, and the reactive using firefighters. Dick calls these parts firefighters because they'll knock down the house to put out the fire. They're not concerned about consequences. They need that emotional fire to be off the table as fast as possible. And then if any of those exiled parts wants to be there at the table, they are welcome as well. They may not want to be, they may not feel safe with these quarreling protectors, and they may want to go to a safe place for a while. But if they want to be there, I'll say, well, invite that part to come sit right next to you or sit in your lap so it feels safe. and I can watch the action here. And then, and this is really important from the perspective that Cease and I were writing about in the book. We start by interviewing the manager part, the one who's shaming and critical. And you can look for the kind of, there are lots of meditations and whatnot on YouTube, IFS informed meditations, and any that that look at polarities will walk you through this kind of what I'm about to tell you. Okay, so the questions you want to ask the critic, the inner critic, are, is this working? And the part might say, yeah, it kind of works, but only in the short run, basically. Yeah, it kind of works. It makes the person do what I want them to do, but then there's this, they go drink or something, and it doesn't work over time. So yes, shaming works, but only briefly. Are you tired? Yes, manager parts will almost always cop to being tired and worn out because they've been doing it for so long. Often they're really young. They may be 6 years old, 7 years old, 8 years old. If you ask them, they try their very, very best. They're earnest. They don't see the irony of shaming to prevent the feeling of shamefulness. They're often too young to get irony very well. And they mean really well, and they're exhausted because life has overridden their efforts. Firefighter parts have been reactive, bad things have happened, they didn't know how to handle it, they're worn out. So would you like some help? Yes. Manager parts will usually say, yes, please do help. And then this really important question, what would happen if you stopped all this shaming, right? And then the part will usually name, you listen to what it says and take notes. I would say that because as you're forming relationships with these parts, you want to be very respectful and listen to what they say. They're going to give you a lot of really important, useful information. So the critic will likely express that it's afraid of one of those, vulnerable parts of an exile, because if that part takes over, I feel too vulnerable to function. I just can feel too raw. I feel bad about myself. I feel, hurt sometimes, and other people don't understand why. I might cry a lot. I might, I'm just on the edge of collapse, or I go into collapse if an exile takes over, right? A part is really hurt or in a really bad place and traumatized and scared and or in danger, right? So those parts are just too vulnerable for everyday normal functioning. And the critic doesn't like that. That's exactly what they're trying to prevent. They don't want those parts overwhelming. They also don't want these reactive protector parts who they view as completely out of control and impulsive or compulsive to be in the driver's seat. So they are really worried about both of those scenarios. And that's one of the reasons why they kind of keep an iron grip and keep shaming and keep working hard, even though they're exhausted and can be really relentless. So then you ask the critic if we could help that other part to be less extreme, if we could help that vulnerable part not to collapse, and not to take over, and eventually to feel better. And if we could help that reactive, impulsive part to calm down and be less extreme in its soothing and distracting methods, would you be willing to take a break from shaming? And usually the answer is yes, but I don't believe you can do that, right? And then the question is, well, would you let us demonstrate that? Because unless you're willing to try this and try something new, you're not going to find out. You don't have to believe it, but you're not going to find out unless you're willing to try something new. So it's really important with all protectors. I'll say this now and I might repeat it. It's really important with all of them to say, this is, you're not signing on for any big deal here. You're just trying something new. I don't even use the word change because it's so loaded for so many parts. So I'll say, try something new, try an experiment, be a good scientist here for a minute. And then if you don't like what happens, you can go right back to what you usually do. Nobody is here to control you, right? And that helps them to be more willing to experiment. So you can find this kind of interview in the questions I just asked in all of my books and in many IFS meditations that are available on the internet. It's very standard. So a second approach is to get internal consensus before making any decisions about sobriety, right? Unless you have really solid relationships with both the proactive and the reactive sides of the addiction polarity, you can't realistically decide whether or how much to use. Because one part may come in and say, I never want to use again, I'm going to be sober, just done with that. And that's a manager, who isn't actually speaking for the part who uses when it feels it has to. And that part will say, sure, I'll sign on for that until it's an emergency, in which case, get out of my way. All right. So hence the approach, the IFS approach to addiction is all about befriending these parts who have gotten into extreme positions. And I keep in mind, and I would hope that you could keep in mind and really understand the protective parts are not their job. And even if they're really extreme and it seems like that's all they do and that's all they think about and that's all they'll talk about, they are not their job any more than you are your job, or you are just a student if you go to school. You are so much more than that. The same is true of your parts. Parts are full of feelings, thoughts, interests. They're full characters, full personality characters, and they're not just what they do. They're not, appearances are deceptive in this way. So in reality, their job is a motivated behavior, and they can try new things, even if they say they can't. They often think they are their job and say they can't try new things, right? So you'll hear that maybe if you talk to a protective part who you really would like to have try something new, and it may say, sure, that's a nice idea, but I don't know how to. I don't know how not to do what I do. And that's a misunderstanding on for the part. It is not its job. It's perfectly capable of trying new things. It's just scared and feels it has to keep trying to do what it's doing, right? So even a fanatically determined protector will find that it has better things to do once it doesn't feel compelled to protect anymore, right? That once that linchpin is pulled, the part will be surprised to find that it doesn't have to do that thing. And actually, if it waits, it'll find out it's interested in other things. Now, sometimes parts who have been very powerful in the system will be scared of that. They'll be scared of giving up power, and they feel, what's going to happen to me? Am I going to disappear? Am I going to be? Is anyone going to care about me? Do I matter? So it's really important to reassure protective parts, that they're not going to go away, they're not going to disappear, they are not their job, that they are cared about just as much as any other part of the system, that they're important, and that they will be able to find other interests and other things that they want to do once they get a little freedom, and that they're valued. So my advice is, as you contact your protectors, if you do this, don't tell them what to do. Do not ask them to take lessons in being rational. Don't say you're being irrational or you should do X, Y, or Z. Instead, listen to the rationale that they have for their behavior, which in their view is good, right? They're doing things, the things they do for a reason, even if they're destructive in their consequences. And if using parts are determined or dismissive of you, if you ask them to try something new, you don't give up, befriend them by being respectful, persistent, consistent, playful, curious, and patient, and listen to them. And don't give up, because, it's like a stubborn kid who's like, no, you don't understand. Well, let me understand. And then I'll help you out with that, whatever your worry is. So the key to building alliances with protectors lies in being curious, interested, and in relationship, not in control, which I'm sure you heard from Sykes too. So be respectful, curious, kind. Tell protectors up front, I don't aim to control you. That's not why I'm here. That statement right there works wonders. I do, however, want to know about you and understand what you need. Right? Put yourself in the part's shoes and you'll see how soothing and calming that approach is. So our job is to understand their rationale for their actions and address their concerns. And I'll say this because I've always found it to be true, that their concerns were always valid once at some point. They may not be valid now, but they may still be valid now. So you got to find out. Never assume you know what a part is up to. Don't let other parts tell you what this part drinks because, or this part doesn't sleep because. You have to get it from the horse's mouth. Talk to the part who's engaging in the behavior. Don't get hearsay from some other part, because it may not be accurate at all. You'll be really surprised sometimes when you hear directly from a part what its concerns are, why it's doing what it's doing, and what it needs. So in short, always assume that a behavior makes sense. And if you don't see the sense in the behavior, just get curious about it. When we address the problem that motivates a protected part's current behavior, it will become willing to try new things and discover other interests. Usually, the problem that protectors dread most boils down to the feeling of shamefulness. And I say that after 30 years in the therapy business. I found this just relentlessly true. So I'm going to do a little internal inquiry with you for a moment. Just close your eyes or rest them somewhere. You don't have to do this if you don't want to. You can go off on your own. But if you want to, you can follow what I'm going to say now. Okay, so close your eyes, rest them, turn your attention inside, check and see if your parts have been listening to what I've been saying, if they're taking this in. Let them know you'd be happy to hear their views later on. and see if they're willing to listen to this. That I'm going to assert that they have good intentions for you, not always for other people, but certainly for you. And they have reasons for doing what they do. And I'm going to start with the ones who want you to be liked and included, right? So ask those parts in particular, your proactive team, to come and sit down with you in a circle or at a table. These are the parts who feel responsible and take care of you. And here's a question that you can ask them. How long have you been taking care of me? Just listen to what they have to say. And then, how old do you think I am? And what would happen if you stopped doing this job for me? Right? Now, once you've heard that, if the part was willing to talk with you, check around and see if any of these proactive manager parts have the job of shaming some other part. And if they'll tell you who, the other part might be young and vulnerable, or it might be some disinhibited, kind of wild, impulsive part, or a stubborn and compulsive part. And just see if it'll let you know who it tries to sit on. Now, those other parts may fear or dislike this critic, right? So if so, and they're around, just let them know they can go to a safe, comfortable place, if that's okay, and let you help out here. So take them to a safe place and then come back to the critic and let it know that you would like to help. Is it willing to let you help either the vulnerable part that it's worried about or the disinhibited part that it fears? If not, that's fine. That's something you can return to. It's an important piece of information for you. But if so, well, whether it will let you do that or not, let it know that you could help vulnerable parts by asking them not to overwhelm you so that you can be with them and comfort them. That's what they're really looking for, is someone to validate their experience, comfort them, rehabilitate their position in the community by believing in them. Right. So you could also help disinhibited parts by listening to their concerns, which probably involve a fear of too much shaming, and promising to help with that, which is what you're doing right now. Okay. And if this has been interesting for them, you could set an intention to find a way to come back to them, either in therapy or counseling or some kind of spiritual practice, whatever way would feel best to you. And you can ask all of these parts, everyone who's joined you today, to notice you again. Just take a look at you and see who you are. See that you're a grown-up. See that you have a lot of resources now. And you can kind of hold their seat while they try something new, even if just for a moment, to see how it feels, and that you all can work together to go forward and be allies and work things out, especially if everybody slows down and really is honest and talks things through. Okay. And when that feels complete, come on back. But once protectors have been heard and they feel connected with the compassionate self in you or in me, I expect them, it's reasonable to expect them to become curious, able to see the difference between the past and the present, which is really crucial, and willing to try new things, as well as open to learning. Right? If you start with the idea that that parts should learn, you're putting the cart before the horse. They are perfectly capable of learning, but they have to feel that it's safe to try something new. Right? So that's why we start where they are. We aim to establish these long-term, respectful, trustworthy relationships with protectors. And by trustworthy, I mean you show up again and again. You show up for these parts. You get curious what they need. You understand if they got some terrible feeling got evoked and a part felt it had to use, or a part freaked out about something, or the parts got into a fight with each other. You show up for them and get curious. Hey, what happened? What's going on? Will you include me? Will you let me help out here? I want to understand you. I get that your concerns are valid and your feelings are real. So here are two ways that you can facilitate your relationship with protectors. First, and this is a big one for me, at least I find it extremely helpful. My parts actually guided me to get this insight. So first with language, okay. This is what I used to feel like. Shame was some kind of thundercloud hovering over my head. It's not a thundercloud that hovers over your head and follows you around all day. Shame is not a noun. It's a verb. And that's what understanding the mind as plural can help us see, that shame is not a thing in the mind. Emotions are not a thing. The shame is an action, right? An act that launches that inside-outside infinity shame cycle. An act by one part in relation to other parts. By paying attention to the shame cycle, you can learn who is doing what to whom, both inside, is some part shaming, another part are two parts fighting with each other because someone feels terribly shameful and they're trying to manage that. Is some part attacking other people in order to try and get that feeling of shamefulness out and give it to somebody else? Why is this part behaving the way it is? What is it worried about? What does it need? What can I do to intervene in the situation effectively? So think and talk this, this using this language will just guide you to think and talk this way. Think and talk about shame as one shaming the motivated act of a proactive protector, right? So if someone comes to me and says, I feel shame, I don't really know where we are in the action, right? This is an action scene. I don't know if they're talking about a part who's shaming them, an internal critic who's really loud and persistent. And that may be what they're talking about if they say, I feel shame. Or they may be talking about that exiled part who feels shameful. There's something wrong with me. I can't be seen. I can't be known. I'm too awful for that. I'm not allowed to exist. So they may be talking about a very different part, not the one who's doing the shaming, but the one who's feeling shameful and unacceptable. And I want to know which it is, because I don't know where I'm starting unless I know what the person's talking about. And the same would go for me. If I felt, oh boy, I'm having a shame attack, I'd want to start, well, noticing the fact that I would have a part who's shaming me, talking to that part and asking its permission to help the part who was feeling hurt and shameful, so that this shaming part wouldn't have to keep working so hard. Right. So are we talking about someone who is doing some shaming, someone who is in a state of being shameful? That's a verb state. Or somebody who is reactive and shameless, a part who is distracting or soothing in order to tame that feeling of shamefulness and survive it, right? So a part who's an emergency worker who has to jump in heroically right now and do whatever it takes to stop that, regardless of the consequences, regardless of everybody else wanting it to stop. It has to do that and do that right now, and it's going to do it heroically and selflessly, basically. And those parts don't get appreciated for what they're doing. When they just get blamed for being shameless, usually. So is it one of those parts? Is it the reactive part who's jumping in? Is it a shaming part who's trying to help out but keeps setting the table for this cycle again and again? Or is it the part who's feeling shameful? You want to get the full picture on this action dynamic that's going on inside that keeps the feeling there's something wrong with me going. Right? So let language guide your internal inquiries. Treat shame as a verb. Right? Second, keep in mind that having compassion is the opposite of shaming. Right? Compassion is the key here. And when some parts who have strong negative feelings are very close to you, you may have a hard time accessing compassion, right? If one part hates another part, which is not unusual if they've gotten into a fight and haven't been able to work it out, you may take a while to kind of pry those two parts out of their fight. I call it, calling a ping pong match, and getting in the middle and saying, I understand both of you. I understand, and I want to help both of you. I have a lot of compassion for why you got to this place and how awful it feels to be here, right? And it's a ping pong match, sometimes between parts who are, fighting with each other. Just say simply, don't use, don't use, and they won't pay any attention to you because they're so busy fighting with each other. And the way to get in on that is, oh, there's the one who wants to use. And there's the one who's saying, don't you dare do that again, you're a stupid idiot. Then there's the one who says, I'm going to go buy a chocolate bar right now. I'm going to do it whatever you say. And, they're not paying attention to you. You're not getting in on the action here. They're not going to listen to what you have to say. Call the game. Be the sportscaster here. Ah, there you are. You're the one who's determined to go buy that chocolate bar. Oh, wait a minute. There you are. You're the one who's so upset about this and wants to prevent it at all costs. And you're really hopping mad. And you're going to say all kinds of vicious, nasty things right now. Oh, and there you don't care what this other one says. So call the game. And would you guys pay attention to me? Would you take a look at me? I'm right here for both of you. I think there is something that is keeping the heat on here. Let me help, right? So the more you listen to your brave protectors, the more compassion you will feel for them, the more you'll understand how they get into these extremes and how awful it feels to be in those extreme places and how stuck and trapped they feel and how they've done their very best to get out of it. And they don't, they've used up all the tools in their box. If they were playing cards, they wouldn't be playing with a full deck of cards, right? They need your help. And you will feel that compassion for them and a readiness and an eagerness to help them. So the more compassion you feel and the more eager you are to help them, the more they will trust you and cooperate. And that's what you're looking for. And I'm not saying it's quick. This is an investment of time and energy and patience on your part to really get with these parts and get them to give you some room so you can experience that you are not them and they are not you, but you are all in this together. And you actually all share the most important goals, which is to be safe and to be loved. And that you actually have, they can start with you. You're there to love them. And they can start with you and then safely go out into the world and find relationships with other people that can be loving and who will love you, but who can't be entirely consistent or there exactly the way you need them at all times. And that'll be okay because you're there. You're always there. You're there like the sun shines. You're there 24 hours a day. Once you form this relationship with these parts, they have solid ground to stand on, and they don't need to engage in those extremes anymore. So I don't know what time it is, but how are we doing?
Yeah, you have about 2 more minutes.
Okay, well, I'm going to stop with 2 more minutes to go because I'm just going to say, don't try to get in control of anyone. Instead, get in relationship with everybody. That's my most, my big advice. And getting in relationship means being hypersensitive to what's shaming for these parts, so the ways in which they're stuck in this shame cycle, and intervening with a lot of kindness and compassion for their suffering as they're in it, and not blame or judgment or wanting them to change or any of that stuff. They'll, change is where everybody gets to when they feel better. Change is the real thing in life. It's just the way life runs. They're stuck. They're not in change mode. We don't start with change. We start with, where are you? What do you need? And when they're feeling better, life inserts itself, change happens, and things get going again. So that is the end. I'll stop share.